we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Exploring Optimization for Site Design in Civil 3D version 2022. My name is Kyle Groves. I am an EIT and an senior technical specialist with ATG USA. I'm based out of their Minneapolis, Minnesota office, though I'm currently in St. Paul myself right now. I'm a Civil 3D certified professional. I'm an Autodesk certified instructor, and I do have my engineering training in the state of Wisconsin. My product expertise is in AutoCAD, Civil 3D, Autodesk storm and sanitary analysis, as well as InfraWorks. I've been doing what I do now for about 4 years, working in depth with all things Autodesk and infrastructure, and about another 3 years of experience prior to that. So want to get in right to it today, folks. What are we here for today? We are here to look at a Civil 3D grading tools overview. So with that, what our big thing is we're going to do a bit of a fundamentals review. I'm not going to go in depth in detail with these tools in Civil 3D specifically. ATG, myself, we've done lots of documentation, lots of webinars and other things on these tools, but we will introduce them so we can talk about some of our other grading tool sets and workflows that we have available to us in a little bit more advanced of a setting. So with that, we're going to be looking at the CIM Project Suite tool for AutoGrader, as well as its earthwork processor tool. And then we're also going to be talking about the new to version 2022 grading optimization tools for Civil 3D. Now, I mentioned we're not going to cover these super duper fundamentals for the feature lines and for the grading objects. This is targeted to still be inclusive for someone with more of a beginner skill level. However, we may get into a bit more advanced things today. So just don't be afraid if you get lost for a few minutes and come on along for the ride. As I mentioned before, I do plan on taking just about the whole hour today. So first up, let's cover a quick review of a feature line and a Civil 3D grading object. So we're going to find these in our Home tab under the Create Design panel, as we do with most of our Civil 3D objects. And our feature lines are really wonderful tools. We see these throughout Civil 3D. We use them as inputs. They're used as outputs for other tools like the corridor tool set. So it's really important that we know how to use these. The best thing about feature lines is once you get just a little bit of exposure to them, you'll understand how easy they are to manipulate. You can take an entire feature line, raise and lower it. You can set a certain number of PIs or elevation points. You can grade in between them. You can have it solve for a high point between or a low point between a couple of things. We've got really fine-grained individual editing where we can go point to point, slope to slope, elevation to elevation. And also, this is going to be the primary definition that we're using for any sort of a proposed surface in a site design workflow. Obviously, if we have corridors in play, those are going to be a big deal. But feature lines are the preferred method for building your Civil 3D tin surface, not polylines, not offsets, feature lines. So with that, let's talk a little bit more about the grading objects. So we're here to talk about the different tools that are available to us in Civil 3D for a site grading workflow. And then we're going to kind of compare and contrast them at the end of the webinar to see, all right, which one of these do we want to use? Which one of these, what are the pros, what are the cons? So for our Civil 3D grading object, and yes, you will see some overlap with the grading optimization tool. But what we're doing here is we're starting with some sort of a parent feature line, and then it's helping us build some concentric offsets based off of that parent feature line. So we might start with a high water line for a detention basin, and we want to offset inward so we can build a safety shelf. We might want to offset outward so that we can build a berm and an emergency spillway for it. These tools dynamically update those child feature lines if our parent changes. So we go through, we do our design, we realize, oh, hey, this high water line is too low. We need to pick this up based on the rest of our site. Well, all of those concentric offsets are going to update dynamically if you update that parent feature line, which is good because it saves us a lot of manual stepped offsets that we have to work with. The other thing that grading objects also do a really great job of is for tying proposed features into another surface. I'm going to refer to this throughout the rest of the webinar as daylighting. Some people call it runout. There's a number of different terms for it, but eventually we need to get our proposed work back into an existing condition. I'm calling that daylight. Grading objects are pretty good at that as far as out-of-the-box tools are concerned. The other thing that grading objects do is they'll automatically add these feature lines, your parent and the dynamic offsets, to that surface that you're looking for. And something that these do a really good job of for all the rest of their flaws is they can build surfaces that have islands of different data. So you don't have to add hide boundaries or do anything like that. It just manages all of that for you. However, grading objects are famously unstable. If you've heard me talk about these in the past, you'll know that I am not a big fan of the out-of-the-box grading objects. Get reports all the time from customers, hey, I was working on my model. It was at the end of the day. I went up to go get some coffee. I came back and my finished surface was just broken. I lost feature lines. Things went bad. So I'm not telling you to never use a grading object. We're not going to cover some of those mitigation strategies in today's webinar. However, feel free to check out my Autodesk University 2019 class called Feature Lines, Best Practices and Suggested Workflows. I go into all of the fundamentals of using feature lines. I talk about grading objects, and we're going to assume that that's all foundational knowledge. You've got that coming into this webinar. So that's a certain set of features. We'll want to know how to use feature lines no matter what for anything we're doing in Civil 3D. And our level 0 kind of basic option is the Civil 3D grading object. I don't like it that much, but it can be better than nothing if you know how to handle them with care. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk kind of, what do we know, what do we not about feature lines and grading objects. So the verdict on these is that a feature line is a fundamental tool. We see it throughout Civil 3D. We've got a lot of powerful editing tools that address a variety of needs and challenges that we need to solve for throughout our project. And it's important for all design users to be comfortable with this tool at an intermediate level. We need to know how to manipulate them. We need to know how to add them to our surface, and we need to know how to use them to modify our surfaces, not just to design a brand new channel swale or berm rim or building pad, but how can we use this to edit our surface, smooth it out, make those triangles look better, make those contours look smoother. If you ask me, everybody needs to know how to do that with a feature line if you're doing proposed work in Civil 3D. For grading objects, they are free, they're reasonably intuitive, and they do function as advertised. You do have a limited ability to solve or automate for your earthwork balance considerations. That's going to be a key thread through today's webinar. We're talking not just how do we design this thing, but also how do we make sure that we don't have to truck in or truck out 200 truckloads of soil on a project, because that's one of our most expensive considerations in civil engineering design. They're pretty tolerable for daylighting to an existing surface. There's a couple of things you want to know about that process to get things to be stable. The other thing about grading objects, and this matters in contrast to one of the CTC tools, is that the resultant feature lines are automated. If you do anything to that parent feature line, all of your children are going to update instantly. Now, if you do update if your design changes and you need to make that master feature line change, you're still going to need to update that master feature line, which is why we need to know how to edit a feature line in the first place. Unfortunately, they're very unstable. It's easy to lose your work. There are countermeasures. Check out my Autodesk University class for some of those, but they're still risky to use in a broad project, in a big project, in a complex project. So let's talk about some other tools that are going to work better. First thing that we're going to talk about today is going to be the CIM Project Suite from CTC Software. We're going to be looking specifically at two tools today: AutoGrader, which is going to help us develop our proposed conditions in a complete and robust way. And then we're going to look at Earthwork Processor, which is going to help us to come up with those volumes and those quantities for our site to tell us, hey, did we come up with a good design? Where do we need to change a few things? So AutoGrader, Earthwork Processor, you're going to go to the CTC website, you're going to download the tools, you're going to install them. You'll see a big ribbon inside Civil 3D. I'll show you that in the software, but we're looking at the grading panel of these, where we'll see AutoGrader and Earthwork Processor. So AutoGrader's job, at least when it comes to area site-based grading, is it was intended to fully replace the native grading object. This replacement is more stable, and rather than being reactive, we're going to take a proactive design approach. So we're going to imagine a right triangle, and we're going to solve that ahead of time. Then we're going to ask Civil 3D to create those stepped offsets for us. We're going to do this by defining something called a grading family to create those stepped offsets from that parent feature line. All of those stepped offsets, I'm going to call those child feature lines, but that's our goal there, is to have Civil 3D automatically process those, and it can even add those to your surface as a break line. Next up, let's talk about Earthwork Processor and get a quick preview on that. So Earthwork Processor's job is to calculate your earthwork cut and fill across your site, and it's going to be using your proposed surface and your existing surface. There are other surfaces that we need for this workflow. Check out my webinar from April for a detailed workflow on how to use Earthwork Processor and also how to come up with a decent out-of-the-box method. My coworker Brian Tanner also had a pretty good one around that time. He used slightly different methodology than me for the out-of-the-box stuff, but both are great if you're trying to learn more about how to do your site balance calcs inside Civil 3D. With Earthwork Processor, it's also going to make it really easy for us to account for different depths of our stripping for the existing conditions, as well as the different proposed materials we might have. So we could have a heavy duty pavement, we could have a light duty pavement, we could have sidewalk, landscaping, 6-inch topsoil respread. Any of those different zones, if we have a polyline to bound it, this tool can help us come up with the volume for that particular area. It's also going to go through and label, hatch, and table our results so that we can very clearly and easily document this. We can put it on an exhibit, we can spit it out to Excel to include it in some other sort of report, and it just makes it really easy to go through that whole process. Lastly, for both of these tools, whatever we come up with inside of our model and our design, we can actually save that set of criteria out to a third location somewhere with our CAD standards that everyone can go through and access. And we can load that back into another project when we have a similar scenario. So if we've always got that same shape of curb, in Minnesota, we like to work with a B612. It's a barrier type. It is 6 inches wide on the top back, and it's 12 inches wide from the gutter line to the flange of the curb. So that's a very common curb configuration scribed out by MnDOT. So we're going to want to use that over and over again. Well, we just load it into our drawing, make sure that our parent feature lines are being found, and press play. And that's how we're going to get all those child offsets. So this simplifies our workflow project over project, because most firms do a lot of similar work over time. And it also has this neat little habit of encouraging our users to adhere to CAD standards. Don't have them? Well, hopefully this webinar will show you why it's important to get those set up and then to encourage your users to follow them. So now that we've gotten our introduction to the AutoGrader and the Earthwork Processor tool, I'm now going to take you through and walk through that workflow, then we'll hop inside the software. So our first job is to create the proposed conditions using AutoGrader. This is going to look a lot like that out-of-the-box workflow if we're using Civil 3D grading objects, because we still need to design our features, our parent feature lines, using some sort of a method. Now, I'm not going to walk through how to set this up, but I will show that I am using this concept of a setup or a molding grid surface to kind of inform some of these complicated horizontal pieces of geometry. But once I've got a design that works in my pavement area, then I can create those stepped offsets to come up with my curb configuration, or to come up with my detention basin, safety shelf configuration, slopes, all that stuff. We're gonna use AutoGrader to create those stepped offsets. If I do need to connect back in and daylight to my existing conditions, AutoGrader does have a function for that, making it a complete potential replacement for the out-of-the-box grading tools. And then we're going to create any miscellaneous feature lines. AutoGrader is great for those stepped offsets, but if we just need to create a feature line, hey, I want to daylight at this location to my existing, just set it to that surface. I need to control some triangulation or do any of that other stuff. We'll want to add those back to our FG surface. And once we're done with that, we can use Earthwork Processor to calculate our cut and our fill volumes. So with this, we'll need closed polylines representing those different materials on our site. Maybe it's different existing in situ materials. We've got some sandy soil over here. We got some clay soil that we need to do some more excavation for. That'll work on our stripping. And then same thing for our proposed conditions. We'll take these polylines and we'll add them to something we're calling an earthwork set. And then it'll go through and process those. The tool will create the necessary intermediate surfaces, and eventually we'll end up with one final volume surface that'll report us our cut and fill values. Not required, but totally optional. We can also use this tool to help mark up our drawing, hatching, labeling, tabling, to help things look better in plan view and to go be used in any sort of report that we might want to use. So with that, let's hop inside the software and take a look at how to use these CTC tools. Once we're done with that, we'll then get into the grading optimization from 2022. All right, anyone who's been hanging out at these webinars for a while might recognize this site. So what we're doing is just a really basic commercial site in the corner of an intersection. I've got my existing surface set up here in my drawing. I've already gone through, I've done my 2D layout. I've got some lines representing curb, a building pad, and a detention basin. So from here, I now need to start creating these other site features. I need to create a 3-dimensional stepped offset series for my curb and gutter. I need to create some inward sloping something for my detention basin. And then in certain areas, I'll also need to go through and daylight back out to my existing conditions. So first, I do want to point out how I got the grades for these feature lines representing my curb. So I drew these out, I sketched them in as polylines, and then I just said, hey, wherever we find a different surface. In version 2018, we got this super cool relative to surface. It will dynamically track another surface inside of a drawing. So if that moves up or down, your feature line will move up or down. And all of these feature lines for my curb and gutter are using that methodology. How I got that set up in the first place was, I call it a setup surface. My other coworkers like to call it a molding surface, because I do like that. But I've got this grid of feature lines. They are in their own site. They have their own styling hierarchy, and they build their own surface. I organize this into a subfolder for our design. This is my parking lot setup. So if I need to change a high point or a low point, I don't have to go point by point along this curb line. I just need to update this rough approximation of my site, and that'll filter its way through all of this complicated horizontal geometry. That's about all I'm going to say on that for now, but suffice it to say that our curb lines have their elevations and we're ready to do some stepped offsets. So as I mentioned before, once I download the tools or buy the tools from my reseller, that's ATG in the US, or if I go to the CTC website, ctcsoftware.com, and download a trial of the tools, post-install, I'll see this ribbon inside Civil 3D for my CIM Project Suite. I want to come over to my grading panel, and I want to run this auto grader tool. So first thing I need to do is I need to actually go and create a grading family. So yes, we are using the word family intentionally to call over to Revit. We want to make this sound more BIM-like, because it is. And when oh no. Sometimes the dialogues get lost behind each other using these tools. But for these grading families, we have Parallel. That's what we're going to be using today. Though there's some really cool things. Check out CTC's webinars. I know my coworker Felix Cortez has done some of these too on residential grading workflows. But these perpendicular and these template insertion family types are both more intended for that. We're just doing area site development, so we're going to stick with a Parallel grading family today. Once I do, it's going to launch this dialog for building this grading family. First thing that I'm going to put together is that B6.12 C and G for curb and gutter. Now with this, I need to first choose my parent feature line. We have two options for that. We can manually select, which is a perfectly fine way to go, but I'm going to start showing off why our CAD standards matter by using this by filter option. So when I run that filter, it's going to give me a couple of different criteria for including data or also for excluding data. The way that I set this up, I really just need to use layer and I don't have to really filter anything out, but I grab my green pick cube, I come grab that object in my drawing, and apparently that's on the pave, curb, gutter layer for this particular drawing. But it found 6 of those. So as I go through my design, if for any reason I need to add curb islands or remove curb islands, I don't need to reselect them. The tool is just going to say, well, what lives on that layer? What's a feature line? All right, that's what I'll use for my offsets. So that's pretty great. I'm going to do this for the full feature line, though I do have partial ranges available, also with pick selection, so I don't have to remember those stations. And now it's time to start building my offsets. And I'm doing this proactively. That's the main difference between this tool and the out-of-the-box grading tool. So I'm starting, I'm calling these lines in my drawing, this is the gutter line. So I need a flange on one side and a top back and a top face on the other. I'll do my flange first. So with this, I'm going to anchor it to the parent feature line. And just like our out-of-the-box grading tools, well, actually we have more options. I have a variety of different ways that I can solve that right triangle. So I can do it with distance and a slope. So that's an X and a slope. I can do it with distance to a surface, slope to a relative elevation, lots and lots of different options. I'll just run distance and slope. I'm going to go off to one side. I'll do that for 1 foot. And I'll do that at a positive 6%. This is going to be catch curb, or rather, my roadway is going to be crowned, so this is accepting water, and that's why I'm sloping up from my parent to my flange. Now, I need to add a new child feature line for this site. And I'm going to call this my top face feature line, but I want to anchor this one back to my parent, and I want it to go on the other side of my, than my flange went. So with this one, I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to go up at a relative elevation because I just want to go over 2 inches, 0.16, and I want to go up 0.67 because I got that another ½ inch, or I'm 2 inches down, and I got to go a ½ foot and 2 inches up for my gutter line. And then after that, I now need a top back feature line. So I'm going to create, actually, I don't use this very often, but there's a copy function too that I can't use right now because we haven't created any of those yet. So just create that new one. We'll call it a top back. And instead of being anchored to my parent though, I really just want to work off of my top face. So that's what I'm going to anchor to. I'm going to go to the left. All right, hey Adam, thanks for that in the chat window saying, hey, this looks like a more intuitive assembly. And I would like to think that you're right. Though I'll let you be the judge in the end. And with this last thing here, so I've got a ½ foot offset, and then I'm staying flat, so I'll use a 0% slope. So notice that down here on the bottom half, this has been updating every time I come in and change a parameter. So this is a schematic. This is not drawn to scale, but it should give you a good idea of what it is you're building inside of this run. So let's see, we've got our parent feature lines. We have built our right triangle. We've solved that all proactively for those stepped offsets. We do have options for formatting these child feature lines. I should have this all set up already, but we have options. We can change the family default. We can change individuals. We can assign them a feature line style. We can assign them to a layer. We can dump them in a particular site. Mine's all ready to go, and this isn't a super detailed webinar on this tool, so I'm happy with this for now. I'll save and close this tool, and now it's showing up inside my auto grader. The tool, pretty much all of the CTC tools, they remember this all on a per drawing basis. So if I were to go into the, save this drawing, close it out, open it up on a completely different computer and run auto grader, I will see this grading family inside this drawing. So the last thing that auto grader also gets to do for us is it will automatically add this content to a surface. So it's remembering all my old surfaces. I got to figure out how to get that to flush out. But today we're using EG, and we're using the spelled out finished grade. That's the one I want. And for my settings, with that ellipse on the far side, this is going to help me go through and put together basically those break line supplementing factors. So I'll have a 25-foot distance and a 0.1 mid ordinance for those curves, because our curb does have lots of curves in it. And now I can go through and I can run this grading family. We'll see a little progress bar down in the bottom. And then there are these different areas populating in my drawing, that's the feature line that it's working on. So I'll close that out. And here's my surface. Let's go ahead and pop that into Object Viewer. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to save. Always save before you go into Object Viewer. While Civil 3D is a 3D software, there's a lot of times where Object Viewer can crash your model. So let's check this out. I actually can see pretty well that I have this curb and gutter happening. If I zoom in and look at all those nice faces on my triangles, except looks like I have some, basically some rain gardens going on with two of these feature lines over here. Well, what's happening with that is feature lines have stationing, just like an alignment does. So there's a start and there's an end. Well, that means that as I go around this feature line, left and right matter. So one thing you do need to keep in mind when you're using this AutoGrader tool is you do have to pay attention to where your line work started and the direction that it's going. Luckily, reversing a feature line is really easy from our modify panel / our feature line contextual. There is a nice little reverse button in there. So I can grab that and run it on those two curb lines. It's going to throw me some event viewers for duplicate points. I can run that again here for this second one. Reverse that. Now, this is the other key difference between AutoGrader and that out-of-the-box grading tool. So with AutoGrader, we do need to manually refresh. Hey, go back and recalculate all of that. That does two things. One, it saves our processing time to a point where we want to use it. Hopefully, a lot of us are using high-powered machines, but if we're not, those automatic rebuilds could be a little punishing at times. The other thing is that it also goes through and it knows which feature lines it created versus which feature lines the user created. So as soon as I refresh this, if I lost any of that parent line work, it's going to delete those out. It's going to scrub those out of my drawing for me. And it's always going to go through and refresh it. So I do see that as a feature rather than a bug, or at least as compared to the out-of-the-box grading tools. I like that I get to refresh because I get to choose. These are the things that are different. These are the things that I want to reprocess. These are the things I want to add back to my surface. And it gives me that much more control as a user for why and when things are happening inside my model. Now that that's reprocessed, let's confirm it in Object Viewer. And I can see that those two curbs had updated themselves with all of that. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip updating my master feature lines, just a brief play around with my setup grid surface, but I've already referred you to some other presentations. I'll let you go through and check that out for those. But we're not done yet. We still need to build a site detention basin. We need to do some daylighting. We've got some other feature lines we need to add. So back here in AutoGrader, let's practice loading a feature line or loading a grading family from another place. So in our options, we do have an opportunity to say, where is that default path? Ideally, we'd have that set to the same place for everybody, but I can now come in here. I've already got a single safety shelf detention basin configuration. So I'm going to open that. It's just a JSON file. It's very universal. Just mostly a really fancy notepad file. Brian, if you want to confirm for me. But with this, I want to add this to my finished grade surface. I want those same settings. Those are actually kept from the other file I created this from. And just to confirm, here's the one thing we do need to deal with. I've got those slopes. I've got those benches. This right triangle's already put together for me, but I don't have parent feature lines. Looks like between that drawing and this drawing, I used a different layer. So this is why we want to pay attention to our CAD standards. This is why we want to pay attention to having them set up well so that we can go through and really just pick, click, run, and get it done. And yes, that JSON file, it is text-based. If you really wanted to, you could even edit it in Notepad if you felt like it. So I now have a parent feature line selected by filter. I can save and close this grading family. And actually, I'll just go ahead and I'll build my daylight grading family as well. And we could watch what happens when we run multiple of these at a time. So this grading family, I'll call this basin daylight. I want to parent, again, based off of that same high water line. It's going to find the one, but this time I don't need to go everywhere. I really just need to do a partial daylight. Cancel, new parallel, range. Interesting. Sometimes with these daylight feature lines, it is helpful if you do a selection rather than a filter. So that, oh, right, it has to be a selection because you have to choose that range. So I'm just going to grab that outside edge and this outside edge. And that's good. We got about 200 station feet. And I just need one child feature line. It'll be my daylight. My method this time, though, is I need to find a surface as my target. So I'm going to run slope to surface, and I'll do about 10%. Should work with my earthwork processor line work that I had pre-baked. You do need to set your target surface here, which is going to be my existing grade, and you do need to check your settings. So with this, the out-of-the-box grading tool does a lot of its math for how often it searches. We need to set that up manually. So we can choose a line increment, a curve, an arc length increment, as well as an angle increment. So I'm going to go 10 feet linear, 10 feet along a curve, and 5 degrees along that curve to make sure I get plenty of points there. I'll say OK. I'll save and close this family. Make sure that both of these, actually, this one's junk. This one should be renamed to daylight. So also the order in here, it does matter. It's going to build these first and then add it to your surface in that order. If you go and check out my Autodesk University class, I talk all about the definition and your build order for that surface. It does matter. I'll choose my finished grade surface and just confirm that I've got good surface factors for that one. And now I'm just kind of scoot this off to the side. And I will run all of my grading families to watch this happen all at once. So it is going to redo my curb and gutter for me, but it's also going to create that detention basin with safety shelf. And then it's going to offset that partial along the east edge of my basin to help me find my site-wide daylight. Oh, wrong side. So I'll have to go back and redo that. I'll close this just so that we can see kind of where that mistake happened on my end. It's really easy to come in and fix this though. So really all that was my right and left were messed up. So I'll come back into AutoGrader, edit my family, offset to the left, save and close. I'm just going to run that single one. It's going to delete it automatically, the bad one for me, and it'll put the correct one off to the other side. Panorama is being real chatty today. So there we go, folks. Let's take a look at this and check out my object viewed surface. And in a few minutes, I have a functioning curb and gutter. I have a nice safety shelved, very wide detention basin. And I'm even going out and finding my FG surface, or my EG surface rather, whether I'm high, whether I'm low. It's just going to run out and find that. So that's using AutoGrader to put together our site features. Now we have a few other things going on here. I've got a building pad. I have some other daylight lines that I just want to use as my property boundary. And this is where the food network magic comes into play. So I'll show you what I have, and I'll show you where it is, and then I'll just turn it all on and we'll get a full surface from it. So I went through, I did some extra feature lines. These are helping me with my triangulation. These are helping fill in kind of this gap between my daylight and this berm and my parking lots. This is a bit of a berming feature. And I'm going to go into my finished grade surface, properties, and my definition tab. They've already been added. I just need to turn them on with their checkboxes. Also, when AutoGrader runs and when it adds things to a surface, it's doing that respecting the build order, and it's going to put them in at the end. So depending on how complicated your site is and when you're doing your auto grading versus the rest of your stuff, you will want to check in on this periodically, or maybe every time. If you have some of those, oh, wait, I wanted to fix that thing. Well, now it's the wrong spot in my build order for my surface. So do keep an eye on that. Turn everything on, make sure they're all building, say okay, watch the rebuild. And I will show you this full surface in my object viewer. one more time, just so that we can kind of see how that looks fully developed out. So I've got some daylight, just the feature line pulling its elevation from the existing surface in a couple of areas. And this is my site. So now I can go through, I've done my design. It's time to get my earthwork balance. That is where the earthwork processor tool comes into play. So I do need to show some more objects inside my drawing, kind of do some layer management here so that we can see the right stuff. Turn off my miscellaneous, turn off my basin too. Kind of simplify things out a little bit. What is this? Topo feet? I don't need no topo feet. Or at least you folks don't for the purpose of this. So what we do need though is we do need to go through and we need to define these in 2D at least where the various parts of our site are. So if you're not familiar with it, the B poly command, it's under your hatch dropdown in your home tab draw if you're looking for it. But that's a really handy way to just take a whole bunch of line work, maybe do a layer isolation, and then once you have a closed area, it's an anti-hatch. It just produces your boundary, nothing in the middle. So on this, I have some landscape. I have a standard duty pavement in my parking area. Actually, there's one more layer we need, which is our subgrade patterns, because hatches are nice. So our green space has that green grass hatch. The transparent yellow is our heavy duty pavement. This is our commercial drive, our trash trucks, our delivery vehicles. And then our standard passenger car parking is just going to be a 12-inch composite material depth for that area of our lot. One really important thing here, these polylines are all offset just a little bit, maybe a 1/10 of a foot or a 100th of a foot. Because of the way that Civil 3D and most of its other competing civil engineering design software function, it cannot handle multiple elevations. It cannot handle multiple Z values at the same XY coordinate. So having those done manually is great. Though with the upcoming release, that's what I'm showing right now is some beta functionality, but we've got a command in the new version of this tool. We're a week or two away, though check with CTC, they're officially in charge of their development schedule. We're very close to this new release, and we're gonna have some automated features so that you can just create them yourself and let the tool worry about those minor offsets. So I have polylines, I needed this anyway. This is gonna be part of my hatching drawing somewhere else in my project. So now for Earthwork Processor, I'm going to run this tool and it's going to function very similarly to AutoGrader. I need to create an empty bin or an earthwork set is what we're calling it this time. Just call mine earthwork set. We need to choose a proposed surface. We need to choose an existing surface, which is going to be my EG. And then again, for those subgrade regions, I could pick those polylines myself, or I could filter for them. So same thing, make my way to the green pick cube. I'll grab everything on that 6-inch subgrade layer, everything on my 18 subgrade layer, and everything on my 12-inch subgrade layer. If you click on the ellipse, it will report back to you everything that has been found. So I do have my 6, my 12, my 18. We'll say, okay, it's going to automatically come in here and populate. Now, it's pulling up a subgrade depth for me. I already went through and assigned an elevation to those polylines. That elevation is positive, and it represents the depth beneath my surface. If for any reason I want to throw an override down though and change that from this interface, I can. Just check the box and give yourself a new value. So maybe I'll go with 0.67 to represent an 8-inch depth in that particular area. So I've got my regions. I can also set stripping depths. It's kind of a wide dialog. Let me make a little more space on my 15-inch laptop screen, and I'll give it a 1-inch strip, or sorry, a 1-foot strip all the way across the site. We certainly have an opportunity to change that though. So we have an earthwork set, we have some data, existing, proposed. There's also, can create your volume surface, add data ranges to those so you can see your heavy cuts and light fills. And there's options for labels and tables. We're not going to get deep into that now. I'm going to run this earthwork set. We'll see our progress bar down here in the bottom left of the dialog. Then we're going to get a whole bunch of numbers showing up in here, which are going to tell us what our site-wide cuts and fills are. It's going to tell us for each individual region, and it's going to tell us for our kind of overall site net. And I'm actually at less than 1,000 cubic yards, which is pretty great because this site is generally very cut the way that I currently have it set up. When I close this, I'll see that my earthwork set just came up with a whole bunch of surfaces for me. This is actually duplicate. I did not clean that out before when I was testing, but it's going to come up with a depth for my stripping. It's going to do that by applying that, that value as a lower operation on the surface. So we're going to get one for our set. We're going to get one for our stripping. We're going to get one for our proposed stuff. And then it's going to give us an overall site volume, which is our earthwork volume. If I go check the surface properties, stats, volume, my net volume for that one was 5,000 cut. So it's one of those two surfaces, and that's how we're going through. So I really can't spend too much more time on that because it's about time to head over to the grading optimization workflow, which I know a lot of people have been excited about. So what we got here with our CTC stuff, let's pop back over into PowerPoint and kind of go through what did we learn from the CIM Project Suite? Well, auto grader. We're using feature lines as inputs. This is common as a Civil 3D object. This is also how the out-of-the-box grading objects work. We can update all of the grading families inside of our drawing with just a few clicks. It's automatically going to delete obsolete line work from previous iterations of the tool, and it's going to completely replace the native grading tools in a parallel workflow with stable and proactive logic. However, it's not all roses. If you have feature lines do have stationing, and we saw this, so we need to pay attention to our left and right. Also, if we're trying to do a partial station range, we can't cross over the 0 point. So you do need to be cognizant of when you're starting a closed feature line, which vertex are you using? Will that affect a partial station range that you might want to use later on down the line? Also, I ran into this on a very large site project recently. So when you're changing conditions like catch curb versus throw curb, maybe I want sidewalk that is adjacent to my parking lot and in other areas I don't, you're going to have to break that parent line work. And you're going to need to manage that data, whether it's by layer management or site management. You can't just draw one feature line across your entire site and get everything you want out of it, but you'd have to do that manually through any other workflow too. So just keep that in mind when you're using this. What is your logic? Do you have the right layer assignment, site assignment for the tool to make everything magical? For Earthwork Processor, this is going to make it really easy to account for our various depths, whether it's stripping existing or different cover types in our proposed conditions. It's also going to automatically create and manage many surfaces while making the resulting volumes very clear for us inside the tool and with output report. We can also have it create hatching for us, labels for exhibits, and then those tables can go in AutoCAD or out to Excel. However, again, you'll have to do this no matter what. You do need to create that boundary line work manually for those different areas. Your depths may change throughout your design, but if your horizontal information changes, you do need to update that for the inputs for this tool. The con for Earthwork Processor is if you don't know a lot about how Civil 3D wants you to compute these volumes, the interface can be a little confusing, and it's tough to follow that thread all the way through. But like I said, check out my webinar from April of 2021, where my coworker Brian Tanner's from the same time. We go all through this tool and out-of-the-box workflows in detail. The other thing with both of these tools and many other inside the CIM Project Suite, these families, these sets, these criteria can be saved out to a central repository and loaded back in for different projects. All right, let's talk grading optimization. We should have just enough time to round out the hour. Of course, I will be around for questions at the end, and feel free to answer those or ask those at any point if you haven't already. So grading optimization, it's new in Civil 3D 2022. Do keep in mind, it is a separate install. It's actually a separate program and a separate interface. We'll get to that later. We can find it inside of our Analyze ribbon. And what it is an iterative design tool. that operates on a set of prioritized constraints. So you'll go through, you've already got your line work set up, so you're going to tag those different site features to be recognized by grading optimization. So you've got different ways to categorize for curb, a building pad, paving areas, accessible zones, all kinds of stuff that we'll see in a few minutes. You get to assign rules to each of those features. So this curb has a particular shape. My pavement might have different minimum and maximum slopes from my green space. And then we also have an opportunity, this is the key thing and why I had to spend so much time talking about balance before with the CTC workflows. With grading optimization, our site balance is now an input. So we don't have to let that be some distant finish line at the end of a really long, complicated workflow. Once you've got all that set up, you simply go through and you optimize your grading. So the components of this tool, we've got 3 different types of data that we can add. We can add in point data, which is a simple low point or a bounded point, kind of gives us an opportunity to let that float and let the tool figure out where a decent opportunity for that to go is. We have linear data. This includes our drain lines, curbs, as well as some other surface bendings, aligned edge bend lines. We've got elevation offset, which says go down in this direction. You can assign it some rules. And then a reveal is what you would be using if you were trying to do a cargo loading ramp that was kind of below the rest of your grade. Don't have one of those in my data set today, though. And lastly, you have your area data. Aside from the pond, everything that I have highlighted here is just and the curb, is pretty much just a different iteration of a zone. So your zone is what you're putting together when you have a closed polyline or a closed feature line. Outside of that, though, the different versions of these basically have different grading and different material depths pre-configured for you. So you don't have to go through and do that all the time. So your accessible is going to have a certain material depth, and it's going to have your 1 to 5%, or maybe for a ramp 0 to 8% type stuff set up. So those are the components. We're going to interface with that through the tool palette. And when you're trying to work with this tool, here's the general workflow. So the first thing you need to do is you need to have all of your 2D stuff put together, but we needed that anyway. Once you do, we'll need to define our site limits for our grading. Then we're going to establish the different zones. Once we have, okay, here's my site wide, here's my parking lot, here's my accessible. Then we need to determine where do we want our low points to be, where do we want our drain lines to be. Note that when I say that we have point data, we are going to need to create COGO point objects to represent that. Once we have all of our low points and our drain lines put together, then we're going to confirm what these grading object settings are and run into the optimize interface. This is going to be a separate window from that separate install. You'll have an opportunity to disable any of your unwanted components. Maybe you duplicated some stuff, or you realize that something wasn't necessary. You're going to organize your zones, just like point groups, just like surfaces, just like a lot of this other Civil 3D data, top to bottom. Daylight is going to be that bottom zone so that it is respected. You're going to confirm all of those options. There's a couple, we'll check them out. And then you're going to run through and optimize, but you're not done there. This is a separate piece of software. So it's going to have to send that data back to Civil 3D. It'll do that through a land XML. And then you're just going to confirm how you want that to get inserted inside your drawing. Let's go ahead and check that out. Okay, so very similar, or it's the same site. I had to change the curb a little bit to make my accessible areas a bit more practical for this tool / an organized layout. But we've still got a detention basin on the east. We have curb and gutter line running through our main area, a building pad, and some daylight limits. Now, I've actually gone through and tagged pretty much all of this data in my model using my grading optimization palette. You'll find that in your analyze. You'll head over to your grading objects. And when you do that, you've got your tool palette for the grading object tools. And then your grading object browser is a separate palette. Let me minimize tool space and expand this grading objects browser. That's going to just tell you, hey, this is the data that you already have inside of your drawing that is related to to your grading objects. So I've got a couple of drain lines, just these two site-wide ones. When you're drawing your drain lines, it's very important. Your first click is going to represent a high point. Your low click, your farther along click is going to be the down point. So just note that you can have a compound polyline, but you're always working from high to low with these drain line features. So we've got those. I have my site-wide offset or my site-wide daylight line. This is basically your property boundary or as close as you feel comfortable to getting to that. I did create like a 10-foot offset. So this is basically going to be where you kind of want to stop and you're giving yourself a little bit of buffer. And then those drain lines are going to make sure that I'm getting this out. My ultimate low point is to the northeast, so that's convenient here. And then I went through, I have kind of where I think my daylight limits should be based off of my design. I've got a building pad. Note that whenever I pop this up, as if it's already been tagged as a grading object, from grading optimization's perspective, it's going to bring up an instantaneous palette for you. These palettes show what the name of this object is. For my building pads, I can make it level or not. I can assign a specific elevation to it from a range if I need to. I've got a depth, and I can also check out its color. So I'll walk you through some of my zones. So for my pavement grading area, this has a maximum slope of 5 and a minimum slope of 1. I have a 1.5 foot depth in there. That's mostly how these different components work. I could run through every single one. However, you'd get there just as fast playing around with this on your own. The big thing that I'll mention is when you're doing the ADA zones, I have kind of 3 separate things going on here. I have a walking path with a 0.5% to 2% max slope. Actually, that can be 5 for this case because it's just a walking path. But then I have ramps set up independently for where I'm crossing over my curb. And I found that if you actually extend that past your curb, it's going to get you a better result. Your inclination direction, this is the key for trying to design a curb ramp. This is saying what direction is your ramp going to slope through. 0 is east, and it's counterclockwise, so right-hand rule applies for direction back to physics 2. So if I want this pointed at south, that's going to be an inclination direction of 270. I actually haven't figured this out completely yet, but what happens if you just want like a straight through cut? So this is 2 zones, one ramping north, the other ramping south. And then for my parking, this I want to be 0.5% as my minimum and a 2% max for my parking area. So outside of that, I have some linear features tagged as curb, as well as some closed area features tagged as curb. My pavement was just a brief boundary polyline away from that grading zone. I do need some quick drain lines in here. So let me come over to my tool palette for a drain line. It wants me to draw them first. So we'll do that. So I'll just go poly, ortho. Oh, it's an arc. 34. So I got low spots in the middle. That's our goal here. I'm also going to draw one to make sure that I go inward on this site too from that parking lot. So we'll do it on one and we'll leave the other one off. Tag my drain lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's open the optimization interface. When you do this, it's going to make you select an existing surface. So it doesn't have to be existing, strictly speaking, but what are you going to be comparing your site balance to? So in Autodesk's big long presentation on this, they kind of do it twice. They take a random greenfield site and they mass grade it flat-ish. Then they come through a second time and put up their big box Costco warehouse type place. So for this case, we'll open up the optimizer. This is our separate window. This is what we look like. InfraWorks navigation for what the left, right, and middle clicks do. and it'll come through and it'll show you what all of your different items are. So it will highlight this as you walk through in your design, your different, I've already gone through, I've organized this. So your daylight, that does need to be on the bottom. That's your widest, and it's the lowest on this list. From there, I wanted to keep my ADA stuff the most important. Then I have my actual pavement zone. And then I have my kind of like overall where I'm looking for that grading to end be. I have a detention basin. Your detention basin, you can tell it what your minimum volume is. It can add a bench for you. It will build a berm for me on this time to go up because I've already practiced with this. And then our drain lines are where they are. Kind of goes through and highlights those. That's all that. For your model settings, all right, this is going to be really fun. I had that on a different number of monitors earlier, so we're just going to keep this train moving. All right, that wasn't there. So our visualization toolbar, that'll kind of help us see some cool things when we're going through. Our settings are important. Those are down by our optimization button. All right, folks, I apologize. We do not have time for me to fix my monitor issues right now. Your optimization settings, this is where you go through and you tell it how many optimizations you want. I should be looking at 10,000 iterations for this one. And then you've got a convergence plot, which will show you how that's running. Unfortunately, I can't get that to show up right now. So I'm just going to get to optimizing. And I'll zoom in. It is preparing the optimization right now. It does take a minute to run to get that all set up. And very soon, these colors are going to start bending around. There we go. So with my optimization, or sorry, my visualization toolbar, I can see a couple of different things happening here, including, I can see, where am I cut and fill? Where are my violations? I can look at it on a triangle basis or at a general basis. I can look at different themes for it. And another one that you're probably interested in is your hydrology slopes arrows. So that's going to be telling you where your triangles are sloping to kind of help figure out how that's all going. Now, we can see if I zoom out far enough, my basin was pretty easy for it to get through. It made my curbs for me really quick. It seems to be trying to pick up my building elevation. And in this northeast corner, that's where it's going to put a berm for me for a lot of my site balance that I'm looking at. With these iterations, unfortunately, we can't see the iteration graph, but it is mine is ebbing and flowing in an up and down pattern, but every iteration that takes some time, the next one should take less time. And it's going to go through and it should move faster as it goes along. Unfortunately, I don't have quite enough time to let this finish through. On a 10K iteration, this was done on my machine in about 3 to 5 minutes. This is a very powerful user machine. This is a BIM box that we also sell as part of our hardware. So somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 is going to be a good iteration number for an average computer. Just expect that to take maybe up to 10 minutes if you're on something of a lower end machine. You do not have to wait for it to finish, however. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'll stop it where it's at. And then when I'm happy with it, I can send that optimized result into my Civil 3D model. So with this, we have a choice to create a brand new surface, or we can update an existing surface. In this case, I've never had this before, so I want my Geo round 1 surface. I will give it a design with tin style. It's just reading that from my model. Also, it can put your feature lines in for you. I'm gonna just say go results for that feature line site. It gives me a chance to run a style for it. I'll just put that at tertiary for now. And we'll say finish. It's going to insert this. My surface is coming in as a land XML. My feature lines are coming in as actual objects. And really the takeaway here with this, folks, this is cool, but I haven't figured out all of the ways to do all of the things that we might want. So let's pop back in and I'll run this through for the grading optimization. Pros, what does this do? What do we like? Well, our site balance is now an input. It's no longer an output. Unfortunately, I couldn't get my dialog up that showed us just how to target that, but we can tell it I want 0, I want 300 yards of cut, or I want to be 30% fill. All of those are options for us, and we get to do that at the front end. It is pretty fast. Even if it's not perfect, it's going to help us rule in or rule out certain design options. However, for the cons, this is outside of Civil 3D. I generally am not huge on leaving the software if I don't have to. Some people also feel that way. Your resultant surface is inserted as an XML, so you don't have direct editing control to fix some of those areas that you didn't like very much. It is going to add your feature lines to the drawing, but it's going to dump them all in one site. Also, those feature lines are going to be really cluttered with elevation points. So it's not just going to be a direct, no, hey, change that long 300-foot slope from -2 to -3.2%. It's not obvious how we're going to be addressing complicated decisions, like do I need a retaining wall, or how I'm going to implement that retaining wall. Then again, this is a pretty new tool, so I'm sure those workflows will come out over time. What I will say, though, is that it is worth further exploration. I think the best way for you to go through and determine whether or not you like or how you like this tool is to use it on a previously completed project. This tool is very line work dependent, and it's also, so you're going to have that line work if you already did the project, and you'll already have a solution that you came up with. So it'll be really easy to compare those differences between what grading optimization thought your site should look like versus what you thought your site should look like. So in conclusion, what we learned today is that feature lines never go out of style. We're always going to have a reason to understand their impact on surfaces. Natively, grading objects might be better than manual objects, but they're still a headache. The CTC CIM Project Suite tools are perfect for those who want to maintain control over the entire process of site grading. You're going to be manually generating your key inputs, but that dependent data is automatically going to be created by the tools. The amount of effort to manage those model objects is reasonable, and your analysis is pretty easy with Earthwork Processor. Because they can be saved and loaded between drawings, it's going to encourage you to establish and for your users to follow good CAD standards to take full advantage of these tools. As far as grading optimization is concerned, it does rely heavily on automation and on rules. Your site balance is effectively an input at this point, which is a game changer for how we put our designs together. It's one of our most impactful design challenges in the real world. Even if our final result isn't perfect and we're not going to submit that as part of our plans, it's an efficient way to get close, or at least to say, well, I definitely don't want a berm over here, or I am going to need to find a spot to build up a 3-foot berm just to take care of some of that cut. With that, I want to mention that you should go ahead and subscribe to ATG on social media. We've got LinkedIn and on YouTube, where this will be posted probably by the end of the week, if not sooner. And I want to say thank you for your time, folks. I know this was a big, busy webinar. I have a webinar slot coming up in August that is yet to be filled, and I would like to spend more time chatting about grading optimization and get into that stuff that we didn't have a chance to cover today. So at this point, feel free to go back about your day. However, if you have questions, I am here to chat with you until then. So let me go ahead and change my presentation mode back to extend. All right, so we had a question come in from Rebecca. So how do we know when to stop the grading of the tool, or how do we know when to stop the run? You're going to know when it stops. I didn't have quite enough time today to finish out my my iterations on that, but there is a let's see, what was it called? In the optimization window, it is your, so under your optimization options, you can choose your number of iterations. You can also choose the convergence plot. Your convergence plot is going to tell you, it's got a y-axis of a logarithmic scale. So you've got your 10,000 iteration, or your maximum number of iterations on the top, and you've got 1 on the bottom of that. As that line comes closer and closer to being 1, stable, and 2, the bottom of that graph, it's getting to what it thinks is a really good design. So your convergence plot is going to level out and it's going to get very far down on your graph. That is how you're going to know when you're close based off of that. So good question. Thanks for asking that, Rebecca. And also, thanks for sticking around to find out. Had some comments from another person in here. So played around with Geo Grading Optimizer. It feels a little like cheating, like a fun toy, but worried about using it at the beginning of the project. How are we going to get to that design? How are we going to refine it later? So yeah, that's my thought too, Adam. I like this tool. I think it has a lot of implications and applications for changing the way that we approach our design. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be really tough to get this tool to take you to 100%. There's going to be a curb ramp that wasn't cut through for some reason. You're going to have to come up with a lot of line work, or maybe you do take the resultant feature lines and you build your own surface so that you can go through and edit it. Definitely a useful planning tool, definitely useful for crunching different design options early and often. But I'm not sure that this is going to be to get you to that 100%. And yeah, like you were saying, Adam, an amazing planning tool. I'm looking forward to seeing more of this, more from the rest of the community, and having more time to dig into this tool myself. I have a couple of, we do some production projects here at ATG. We don't stamp your plans, but we'll help you put them together. Got a few of those coming up that I'd like to see where this tool can guide us on that project. So folks, I know we're a little bit after the hour. I sincerely appreciate you jumping in and hanging out with me this whole time. If you do have any more questions, I'm here to answer them. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time today and have a great rest of your day. Yeah, I got another comment from Danny. If it can get us to 75% for a design, then that's a good place to be. And yeah, because it takes a lot of effort to get to 75%, and then make those fine changes from there. All right, folks, not seeing any more questions come in, but we'll leave the line open for another minute or two here. In case you were wondering about the CTC tools, you can head over to ctcsoftware.com. Under their products banner, we've got the CIM Project Suite. There's also another manager suite for CAD managers and some free sub-assemblies in the Corridor Productivity Pack. But you'll go find your CIM Project Suite tool where you can go and you can download your 14-day unlimited full access trial. Also, some of the sample files, not exactly what I was working on today, but a lot of the things that you might see on a demo so that you can go through, play with it yourself, check out some of the CAD standards, the way that we built them, and adapt them or borrow them for your own use on getting these tools implemented on your side. Also, if you've got some decision makers you'd like to impress, we've got some brief 1 to 5 minute videos, as well as some paragraphs and bullet points on all of the different tools inside the suite. Grading optimization, it is for version 2022, presumably, and newer. Not available in 21 or earlier. It is a separate download, so make sure you talk to your IT department about including that in your download bundle. It's going to run outside of Civil 3D, which may or may not be a good thing, or may not be a bad thing. It comes down to preference. And thank you so much, everybody, for your time and attention today. Not seeing any more questions, and we're well past our original hour. So thanks, folks. I'm going to go ahead and close it. If you do have any more questions or anything else that you want to talk to me about, feel free to send me an email, kgroves@atgusa.com. Also find myself and ATG on LinkedIn to stay in touch with all of the latest webinars and all of the latest news. Happy Thursday, everybody. Have a great weekend.